Hello, my name is Nabil Hamdi. I'm Professor Emeritus at Bruk's University. The title of my lecture is Participation in Practice. And I start with an assumption that I have tested internationally. Participatory practice is both necessary and efficient. It's fundamental to building community, which I've come to realize is equivalent to building the social economy of place and not just the market economy. That is, the economy of assets, tangible and intangible, necessary for well-being and for sustaining livelihoods. It's fundamental for human development, that is, again, expanding people's freedoms and choices and their capacity to lead lives that they value. So what is it, this participation thing that we talk about? And many people will have very different definitions based on their own background, their own discipline, whatever it might be. The one that I like most is the one that you see here, and that is, it is responsibility with authority in partnership with other stakeholders. Responsibility because with rights come responsibilities and because it's fundamental to efficient work. Authority because inevitably the strategic agenda of power sharing. And in partnership because participation without partnership is meaningless. Partnership with other stakeholders who have a vested interest in both the benefits and of course have an interest in the risks at stake. So why do we need it? For a practical point of view, it's a good way of defining needs. That is, a combination of desire and necessity. It's a good way of converging vested interests. In other words, of bringing people together who may have very different agendas, but who can find a basic interest as a starting point. It's a good way of getting accurate information, which is very often hidden in place and needs to be excavated through participatory processes, through some of the mapping techniques that we'll see in a second. It's a great way of identifying conflict and troubleshooting, bringing people together and observing who's the loudest voice, who's saying what. It's a great way of discovering alternatives. And again, it's very difficult sometimes for professionals to put forward alternatives that may not be professionally acceptable. Much of the work that we do in the informal settlements or wherever have within them ideas, alternative ways of solving problems that are hidden and again need to be excavated and where people can be empowered to exercise those alternatives. It's a great way of providing continuity, and that is once the outsiders pull out, who is it that's going to carry on? And of course participation over the long term is key to that process. It's a great way of mobilizing interests, of getting people really interested in what's happening as such. Mobilizing resources, again, my contention is that much of the resources that we need to fix place are already in place. They need to be excavated and used before we, as it were, go out and start begging. It's a great way of creating partnerships, as I've mentioned. It positions problems accurately by way of trying to understand how people perceive problems. And it's a great way of reducing dependencies. Two questions always recur. Who initiates these programs and who ultimately really benefits? Adding strategic value is also key, as I mentioned. If you look at the diagram here, you'll find some of the key words, or jargon words if you like, in the development business. Empowerment, gender, resilience, asset building, identity building, partnerships. It's impossible, again, to think that any of these things can be done and embarked upon over the longer term without participation. If you take a more specific example, for example, the supply of inadequate water supply, the practical agenda with water is usually very clear. It's about sanitation, about health. It's about pipe sizes, water flow, amount of water, walking distances, and the rest. The strategic agenda, however, is about gender, it's about enterprise, it's about ownership, it's about creating partnerships, all of those kinds of things which lead us to an improvement in security, in maintenance, in livelihoods, and in governance. Once again, it's impossible to think that the longer-term strategic agenda in water supply and management can be done without participation. So what do we need to know? We need to know certainly something about the type and structure of community. And again, the word community is used loosely, particularly when we talk about community participation. Community variously can be interpreted as community of place, people who share a place, community of interest, communities of practice, people who share work habits and the rest, communities of culture and the rest. In any one place, there may be different communities of culture. Some of them may be in open conflict. We need to understand something about that structure prior to engaging with the so-called community. We need to know something about the kind of actors, whose vested interests at stake, whose priorities will count, who holds most power, not only between governments and communities, but within community itself as well. We need to know something about the culture of decision making. How do people arrive at decisions without the sort of speed and routine and rather linear way that we tend to go about our decision making process from the north? And certainly we need to know something about the existing organizations and their hierarchies. Now, how do we get to know this stuff? Well, there are various ways. Transect walks, which take cross sections through neighborhoods. These all come from participatory rapid appraisal or from planning for real. Diagramming, where we look at relationships between things. Modeling, which gives us a sense of the spatial makeup of place and gives people a much better sense of how to understand their own place in which they live in. Lots of mapping techniques that reveal something about the hidden structure of place. Finally, a number of conditions for participation to work effectively. Certainly we need strong local organizations, and if they don't exist, that capacity has to be built up. The capacity of partners to be able to exercise their partnerships is a key part of participatory work. There does need to be political goodwill, and I don't mean that we have to accept politically that participation is a good idea, because in fact some governments will find participation threatening, because after all it tends to polarize communities into political parties. Ownership of the problem and not just of the solution, in the sense that we own the way in which, not just the way in which we devised a particular solution to a problem that we faced, but actually we do share a sense of the problem. The problems are not just brought from outside, we experience them here. It's not too abstract, it's not about climate change, you know, when my roof is leaking, as it were. We certainly need a common cause. It's much easier to mobilize around something that we all share as being problematic. It's a good starting point. Some say that either participation works either through stability or through crisis. Stability in the sense that we have time to mobilize and to embark upon these processes, but also at times of crisis where we need to quickly mobilize. Trust is absolutely key. We need to ensure that those who are part of the process have a vested interest in it and are not doing it in a way that is deviating from local interests. Good representation is another good one. Very often we find ourselves actually bringing people into the same room by way of representation, and that can have negative effects. For example, you may well find that everybody's in the same room, but the men are the loudest noises, the women are saying nothing, there are actually no children properly represented except of a certain age, and so on. Good representation may well need to be sought from different places and those interests brought to the table, as it were, rather than the conventional routine, which is where we conduct these processes all together in one room. And then ultimately, tangible results. The absolute key to participatory programs is that something happens quickly and immediately. Very often I have found people coming along and saying, we've been through these processes I don't know how many times, you're the fifth organization that's arrived, nothing ever happens. Tangible results build trust, and it actually gets things going quickly. It mobilizes interests and ensures that at least there's the start to a longer term strategic agenda. Thank you very much.